Anyone know why I'm raising my hand like this? You learned about this? Right, from the kids. So one of the things we do, it's a school thing. I don't know why it's in schools, but it's an effective thing, which I learned eventually. As a New Yorker, I tend to like to just whistle, but apparently that's not apropos. So what you do is if you see someone with their hands raised, you raise your hand. And then other people see you with your hands raised until most people have their hands raised, and that's a way of getting attention without causing too much of a ruckus. So I'm a slow learner, but I'm eventually doing it the right way. I want to welcome everyone and just briefly say how happy we are that this series continues. We actually began this Edge in Education. It wasn't originally called Edge in Education. I think we called it Parents Focus Groups or something. And then some very wise parents, Rebecca and Carmen, I believe, suggested, after speaking to other parents, that why don't we call it Edge in Education? So that's not my title or the school's. That was actually, there were parents who came up with that description. I think it's an excellent one because what we're trying to do is to we talk about inspire, engage, and empower learners. We're all learners. Parents are learners too. It's not just kids. And we all have kids, or many of us have kids at home, and we have a huge impact on their learning. So what we do in school is impactful. What teachers do is tremendously impactful, but what we as parents do is tremendously impactful as well. And so the concept behind this program is to make sure that parents are engaged with the thinking that the school is engaged with. Make sure that parents understand the kinds of things we're thinking about. Often a parent looking from the outside might wonder, why is the school doing this? Why is the school taking on this new initiative? There are good reasons for it, and we want to make sure that you're part of the conversation because your questions and your ideas help inform us and they help make us do a better job. So we're going to continue to do these kinds of programs and many other things, the coffee mornings and all the different ways we engage with parents. That's as important as the professional development we do with teachers and the work we do with students. And one final point about the Edge in Education is that it's evolved to a place where it's a really kind of a professional process because the people who are speaking to you are the same people who are working with our own teachers and helping them in their professional learning. And so we've decided, let's make that a regular process where we leverage the fact that they're here already to work with parents so that parents really get and are involved in the conversation about learning. So I'd like to ask Teresa to introduce our guest speaker. Teresa.
Thanks, Arnie. And just a reminder, we try to have a theme every year. And this year we chose to go with the theme of our ISB 2020 strategic plan is Unleash Our Collective Potential. And I think what you'll learn from Christine today is how can we do that with our own children? How can we really help facilitating unleashing their potential? So we're thrilled to have Christine with us. We just hosted a Reggio-inspired learning conference for early childhood educators this past week. They came on Thursday, and then we finished up Saturday afternoon. And Christine is one of those folks who came in to help present and facilitate. We had 5 different presenters, 2 from the UK, 1 from Italy, and 1 from Istanbul, in addition to Christine. So just to give you a little background on Christine, Christine has been a professor and chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at Portland State University, focusing on early childhood education, where she's taught since 1991. Her doctorate is from UCLA, and she also studied with Jean Piaget at the University of Geneva, who's one of the great gurus of child development and how children develop over time. She is the author of Constructivism Across the Early Childhood Curriculum, Big Ideas as Inspiration, and co-author of The Young Child as Scientist, a constructivist approach to early childhood science education and integrating math and science in early childhood classrooms through big ideas. And she's done a bunch of other things around the world, some very exciting things. I think I'll stop there because she has a very long biography. She's accomplished a lot in her years. And we're excited to share it with all parents, not just early childhood, because it's really the basis of how learning happens. And her title here is Children and Parents as Theory Builders, and how do we nurture that with our children at home? So not just here at school, but how do we really nurture that? And it's the heart really of so much of the type of learning and our approach to learning here at ISP. So without further ado, Christine Chaille, even though it looks like Chaille in French. Christine.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here talking to the most important people in children's lives, the parents. And it's so interesting to me because, and it's wonderful that you have this involvement in your school, because I think the disconnect between schools and what happens at home is detrimental to to the continuity children experience. But more than that, I think, as you'll see, what I'm going to talk about is how everyone learns and how everyone thinks. Children, and in my case, since I focus more on very young children, a lot of people think young children think differently than everybody else. No, they think like everyone else. And I've always felt very strongly that the things that I have to say and that Piaget said about young children apply to everyone. They apply to all ages, and they apply to us. And I've actually done a good deal of work with teacher education and teaching adults and the ways people learn. It's not a developmental thing. We all essentially learn the same way. And I've begun to think a lot about how parents think and learn and interact with their children. And it's this parallel process to how teachers and any adults in children's lives think and learn. And to me, I'm the parent of two children who are 31 and 36 now. They're children. They're grown-ups. They're still my children, as I will remind them periodically. But I think that I've been thinking a lot about how the things I've learned about working with young children really apply to how I interact with my children, even as grown-ups now. That the principles that govern what I believe in are so important. And I've actually, I recently retired from my position at Portland State, so now I don't have to do all the administrative stuff that I was doing, but now I do more writing and thinking and consulting. And my next big project is a book for parents about supporting children in their development and in their thinking, because I really feel it helped me as a parent, and I have two incredibly perfect children. I have two very challenging children, which is a good thing, and you'll see why. I mean, they're wonderful human beings. But anyway, so this is a really, to me, one of the great opportunities. I was here in February working with some of the early childhood, pre-K and K mostly, but some of the primary grade teachers as well. And then returning here, doing the conference, and now these 3 days working with the teams again and seeing their growth and development themselves and learning from them about what they're doing in the classrooms. So even though, or maybe because I'm going to be talking about young children, and that's my own area of expertise, I ask you to join with me in thinking about how this applies to all children and to adults you work with as well. I think it's equally important. I applied the things I know about this to my work as chair of a department in working with the adults, the faculty that I oversaw as chair. So I hope you'll join with me in thinking about this together, and I welcome the questions and issues that you're faced with as parents when I've finished going through what I'm going to share. So, on that note, here's what we're going to talk about. What is our understanding, my understanding of how children learn? What is our role as adults in this process, as teachers, as parents? how do we support children in their learning? And the underlying question with that is, how do we know what children are thinking? It's a hard question. And what does this mean for parents as theory builders themselves? And this is, I think, the heart of what I want to get to, is who are we as parents in this process? I want to start with a story from a classroom, actually, that will introduce some of my ideas. I've been working with a group of schools, Reggio-inspired schools in Lima, Peru. And amazing schools. And I was working in a classroom visiting a classroom of 4 and 5-year-olds, in which I was told that a few days before I came, a child had brought in 2 very large, I'd never seen them this size, dry seahorses. Beautiful. And he was sharing them with the class, and one of the children said, so they're dead? And he said, yes. And another child said, no, they're not. They'll come back to life if you put them in water. And they had this huge argument about this issue. And so when I came, the teachers in their wisdom just let this be. And when I came in, they were seated in the studio, about 6 children at a table, with a bowl of water and the dry seahorses, and they were going to explore their predictions about the seahorses. So they began by putting the seahorse in water, and they all stood around. You see they have magnifying glasses and paper and pencil, and they all stood around watching the seahorse and waiting. And they waited, and they waited, and they poked it now and then. And what's your prediction? Right. And so finally, one of them said, well, it hasn't come back to life because when they live in the sea, there is sand on the bottom of the sea, and this is just a bowl of water. And so they ran out to the playground and got sand and put it in the bowl of water and let it settle to the bottom, and that took a while. And then they put the seahorses back in and waited and kept waiting. And so after another period of time, someone said, well, the sea is salt water. It's not this. So, okay, so they all got salt, and they got salt and put it in the water, stirred it up and waited, and mixed it up, and they didn't move. And one of the children picked up one of the wet seahorses now, and took the curved tail and pulled it back, let it go, and it sprang back. And he said, look, it's moving. And so then there's a big argument about what did that mean? Was it really moving? And so they finally accepted that it wasn't coming back to life, but why? And they had this, again, more discussion about what would help it come back to life. And one of them said, well, in the sea, they live with their families. And so they need their families around them. So that's, so at this point, the teacher gave them, here you can see, the opportunity to draw some of their thinking to represent their ideas. There's the seahorse with their family. And then it ended. The time in the studio was over. And we're left with a question of what's going on here. So at the end of that day, I sat down with a group of teachers and the administrators in the school, and I described this episode to them. And they asked me, they said, well, what would you do next as a teacher? What would you do next? And I said, well, let me ask you, what do you think the children were trying to figure out or were exploring here? And we had this very animated discussion as adults about what's going on here. So I'm going to ask you, What do you think the children were trying to figure out here? I'd like you to talk among yourselves a little. What do you think they're trying to figure out? What are they exploring? What ideas are they thinking about? And just take a couple minutes to talk about that. So what were some of your thoughts about this? What were they thinking? What were they exploring? What did you say?
Exploring an idea.
An idea, but what idea? What are they trying to figure out?
Whether they can bring back something that does not have signs of life back into different form.
So bringing something so talking about life. And
yeah.
Okay.
To find perfect conditions which make the creature alive again.
So the conditions under which something's alive. Okay.
Yeah, very similar. How do things live? What do things need to survive, and which can be a lifelong unit. And I think about the questions that can come with learning something like that, and it's so big, which is really interesting.
A big idea, yeah. Other thoughts? Yes.
We were talking about two ideas. One is whether that is reversible. I think we're saying that sometimes we're the adult, when someone passes away, we say, oh, grandma is in the sky and she's watching you, and the kids were like checking, oh, can I just grab grandma back? And that's could be like where we can bring it to life again. And the other thing is what is the right condition for living? I live in my home with my family in my room. Maybe if we give this seahorse the same condition in his room with the family, he will go back to life. That would be a good life for him.
And other thoughts, other ideas you thought of?
But it's also how kids are using their very narrow understanding of reality, the family, the sand, the salt in the water, whatever they know, just to make sense, to build a concept based on that knowledge that they have. The bigger concept that makes sense has some kind of logic for them.
Of course, they're trying to make sense out of things, yes.
Yeah, we also talked about the next steps of trying to figure out if trial and error and failure is something that's important in class and in life and in education, and how that concept is not always easy for our children, for us as adults or for our children.
Right.
Whether death is permanent.
Whether death is permanent. Yeah, so there are these different ways of thinking about this. Some might have to do with sort of what are the conditions for us, what makes life livable, survivable. The other is death, the impermanence of death. Is it reversible? That gets into some big issues of really of religion and cultural beliefs about death and life. There's also a really big idea of transformation, of something being one thing and turning into another thing. So being alive, becoming dried, and then can it change back to the state it was in before? How is it different under what conditions? And those are very different kinds of ideas. And I think, there are a couple of things about this story that I think are really important for parents to think about. One is the reason I recounted this to the group and to the administrators was that it was such a great example of allowing the children's ideas to be taken seriously and explored. Instead of responding, no, the seahorse is dead, it's not coming back, and not sort of jumping in as a teacher or an adult and answering that question or giving them the truth as we know it, or the truth as we believe it culturally, but rather letting them have their ideas and grounded in their own life and experiences, and going through this process of exploring it, and letting that evolve, and sort of sort of restraining ourselves as adults from wanting to clarify what's going on here. What is going on here? And the question of what do you do next as a teacher or a parent in this kind of situation is also important, because what is sort of the outcome of letting this just transpire with our support? I mean, the teacher made space and opportunity for the exploration. This is significant, that the teacher not only just didn't jump in, but actually encouraged and facilitated children exploring these questions. And what is the goal here for that? Is there clarity for the adult about what the outcome will be? In other words, is the goal for children to understand that seahorses are dead when they're dry? Is that the goal? I mean, is there scientific knowledge to be accumulated here? Or is there something else, in addition to learning skills that will help you acquire scientific knowledge, is there something else about the importance of children's own questions, the importance of their explorations, of their experimentation, of giving that room to try out your ideas and have them be disproven? As you said, failure. From a constructivist perspective, and I consider myself a constructivist, there is no such thing as error. It's just an opportunity to learn. And that's, I think, a really important, you don't try to minimize mistakes or failure or error as a constructivist. In fact, when something doesn't work the way you think it will, like when they don't move, it's like, oh wow, isn't that interesting? Our prediction wasn't borne out. That's a good thing, because that means you have a lot to construct. You're constructing more. So I want to show you this process and talk about the way I like to talk about how children learn and how all of us learn is theory building. That's what we're doing all of the time. It's not just a linear scientific process, but it's actually ongoing constantly. And I want to show you an example of what this looks like. So this is just a sort of a little example, visual example of theory building that I'm going to talk about. And what happens when you build theories? You come to an experience with theories. This is really important. Children have prior experiences. We have prior experiences. You're all coming to this with different ideas about what I'm talking about. and applying it. Well, is she talking about this? How does this fit into what I heard about this? You know, this is what we do all the time. We come to every experience with other theories. When we present materials to children or an experience to children, like I'm always struck by in early childhood, then you take a 5-year-old and you give them an experience with sink and float, right? You give them opportunities to engage in experimenting with things that sink and float. And often you design, I've seen it done in a way that you think, wait a minute, you guys, you're saying these kids have never had experiences with objects in water. You know, think of all the opportunities kids have had already to explore and experience things differently, each one differently, and build theories about what sinks and what floats already. So to acknowledge that children are coming with theories to every experience, and they're different, one from the other. And the other thing that's really important is that all of us, apply our theories. We don't just have them and then that's how we think. We are actively trying to understand the world, and so we are always applying our theories to what we encounter in the world. And the reason that's important is there's nothing we have to do as adults to motivate children to do that. This is what we do as people. We're trying to figure out the world. So we're applying our theories and making predictions and seeing what happens. And when we do that, we have a theory, we often apply it, and then sometimes we apply what we think is going to happen and it doesn't work. We'll try it again because we think, well, maybe it was just an accident. And then we vary what we did to see if we can make it differently. So experimentation, trying out our theories involves a lot of repetition and variation. And we watch what happens when we do it. We see the outcome. And based on this, we build more and more complex theories. So I want to talk just quickly about some of the key elements of theory building that are important for us to recognize as adults. One thing is, it's not just something that happens in school. It's not just something that happens when we intend it to happen. It happens constantly. Children are building theories in every situation. We are building theories in every situation from birth on. And so it's not like I've had some of my students have said things like, well, I'm going to set up theory building experiences in my classroom. And I say, no, you already have theory building experiences. No matter what you do, that's what's happening. You see, it's happening when you do something stupid as a teacher. The kids are building theories about that. It's not intentional. Not that any of us do anything stupid. The other thing is theories are built through experiences, through children's own actions, and by actions for older kids, that's often their ideas are actions, through play, through application of their own ideas, and not by being taught or told what it is. So the construction of knowledge has to come from the child's own theory building and not from being told what the answer is. In fact, if you're told what the answer is and taught something, it actually can not only interrupt the process, but actually stop theory building, because you don't need to keep thinking about it anymore. And children are always making connections. They're always applying their theories in new and different situations. And in fact, Piaget defined intelligence in one thing as the ability to apply what you know to a new situation, which I think is really, it's that making connections across experiences. And this idea of making connections, one of the things we've been talking about with the teachers in the younger children's classrooms is and it's true for your older kids too, is is the idea of integrating curriculum or seeing things related to each other in different contexts. So what you're reading in English literature has a connection to art or the humanities or social studies. You know, it's like there are all of these big ideas that connect across curriculum areas. That's the kind of thing that I think is really important because of how it fits with what children are trying to do. So they're trying to make these connections, and you as an adult can help make those connections. Similarly to the things they're learning in school and the things you're exploring with them at home, or experiences you have going places and seeing things, you can encourage those connections across different experiences. So I'd like you to think now, one of the things that I find interesting about talking about theory building is once you start to think of what kids do as theory building, you see it everywhere. Or think of your own experiences, that you see it in yourself. So I'd like you to talk at your tables a little bit about examples of theory building in your lives or in your children's lives, no matter what age they are. So take a few minutes to do that. So what are some of, let's just hear a couple of examples that you came up with at one of your tables. Up here.
Okay, our television sound went off last night, so we had to explore what was wrong and turn things off, turn things on, check the setting, check the connections. Okay. To check the settings, to check the everything, and then as you check, you find out more things about the things that you didn't notice when it all worked.
We were just talking about how stereotypes could be a theory, and every time you meet someone from that group, and Dr. Vega was saying if your eyes are open, then that person either proves the stereotype or disproves it. And I was also telling them that my 4-year-old thinks that all children speak English because when he's at school, everyone speaks English, and we talk to him in Arabic. So when we go back home, he talks to adults in Arabic, and then if he meets children, he talks to them in English because he thinks all children play in English. So
that's great.
And he keeps trying and trying until he eventually gives up. So.
He's persistent.
Yeah.
Back there. Thank you.
I was just going to take it to someone. Who's next?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you do obviously see a lot of experimenting in your house with building and with what happens when you squeeze your food and et cetera, but that also leads on to an idea that actually they're experimenting all the time about what's acceptable behavior and what's, so it's not only with forming theories about science and the world, but also what's acceptable in my house, what's acceptable in school, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're constructing theories about everything in our world, and yeah.
Someone else have?
Okay, well, there's a wonderful book. I don't know if you know it, called Math Curse. I love that book. Librarian. And this is sort of like that. Now, you've always seen it. You've always noticed this, but now you'll really see it everywhere. I'm sorry about that. But it's important to think about what do we need to engage in theory building. It's not just what children need. What does anybody need? And one thing is time. And even that little cup stacking thing, sometimes people watch that and they think, oh God, it's just going on and on, because it takes a long time to explore something thoroughly. Now that was nothing, you know things. Theory building doesn't happen continuously. We build theories discontinuously as well through multiple experiences. So it takes a lot of time, and we need in our schools and in our homes opportunities for that time to happen. Time is an important resource. We tend to segment it, we tend to rush things, we tend to not notice that something should be allowed more time to transpire, that a child is trying to figure out something, and this is important to give time to that. Theory building may be in a social context. Sometimes theory building happens as a social event. You're constructing theories together and through interaction, or alone, or with adults. It's important to notice what resources are available. In the case of, even the TV sound or the sound going off, it's like, does the family have opportunities then to really take apart things that, are you allowed to do that in this context, to explore that? It requires it. And in the case of children, support and facilitation of that theory building when necessary. The little girl did not need any support in her experimenting with the cups. And very often, support is not needed. And so the question of whether you need to support it in any other way, it has to be based on we'll talk about this later, listening and observing what's going on. So now that you know thoroughly what theory building is, what is it for us to be parents of theory builders? And one of the things that I find, and I think is really important, is when we start to think about children as theory builders, as opposed to, the other view of learning is that knowledge is not constructed by children, but knowledge is transmitted by adults to children or by the culture to children. That's the alternative view. If we shift our view to seeing children as theory builders, as actively constructing knowledge, our image of the child changes. How we think about children is different than if we think of them as passive recipients of information and knowledge. And Loris Malaguzzi, he was one of the founders and gurus of the Reggio Emilia approach in Italy. He said, it's necessary that we believe that the child is very intelligent, that the child is strong and beautiful, and has very ambitious desires and requests. This is the image of the child that we need to hold. Now that's a pretty powerful statement about what we believe about children, that they're intelligent. They're already very intelligent at birth. They're pretty amazing. And that's when you think of children as theory builders, that's what you believe. And that they're motivated and active in trying to figure out the world. And they have desires and requests of us, of the world. That's a strong statement, and it's something to think about. We tend, and this is a normal thing, I think we tend to think often if a child can't do something, they're not competent or capable, right? So instead, you think of, well, they're applying what they know to the best of, that they are smart with what they have. Everything that children engage in is based on their deep understanding of the world. It just can be deeper. It can be different. It can be more complex. It will build. It's to think of this as a base of really seeing children as worthy of respect. I think that I keep coming back to this word respect in my work with children. So what is your image of the child? I'm not going to ask you to talk about this. It's something I want you to think about, and it's an ongoing process of reflecting on how is it you are seeing children? How is it you're seeing adults in your life? What kind of image do you have of them? Are they thoughtful? Are they doing the best they can with what they have? I always like to say it's like this idea of being judgmental. instead of being judgmental and evaluative of people, of sort of honoring who they are for who they are, and making what I like to call the benevolent assumption about people and their motives. That's what constructivism is all about, is you are saying children are really smart. We had an interesting experience at my university. There's very little formal university education for working with infants and toddlers. And we do that at my university. And so we were proposing a new university graduate level course called Teaching and Learning with Competent Infants and Toddlers. It's a wonderful course, by the way. And when we put it through the approval process, people who didn't know what we were talking about said, well, wait a minute. If you have this course, you need to have one for the incompetent infants and toddlers. And we said, oh, a teachable moment. We can tell them why we say that in the title of the course, because all infants and toddlers are competent. So that, reflecting yourself on in different situations, what is your image of the child? What is your image of other adults you work with? What's your image of your partner? Anybody you interact with. It's an interesting experience. Loris Malaguti also says both children and adults need to feel active and important, to be rewarded by their own efforts, their own intelligences, their own activity and energy. When a child feels these things are valued, they become a fountain of strength for the child. This idea of what is it that children gain from our viewing them as theory builders, of our showing respect and understanding to what they're trying to figure out, instead of telling them something different or doing it for them. When you do something for someone, you're saying you can't do it yourself, right? You're saying you're not capable of doing that. Here's how you do it. It's a tricky one. A lot of us want to be efficient. We want to, correct things. We want to move things forward. And it's not that there aren't times when that's necessary. You don't want children to construct knowledge in a situation that's dangerous, for example. It's not okay to construct the knowledge that putting a metal fork in a light socket will produce an effect, right? That's not okay. We don't want that kind of theory building. I mean, that's a extreme example, but there are other situations where you want to cut things off as an adult. You do have power. And this is another really important point about this supporting theory building, is that adults have power over children. We have, you might not think it sometimes with your kids, you won't, no, I have no power. You have power. Your words have power. Your reactions to things mean a lot to a child, no matter what kind of relationship you've aspired to have. And I'll use an example of a teacher in a classroom. Teachers often want to create a democratic classroom where children feel valued and their opinions matter. They have say in things that happen, right? And as parents, sometimes some parents want that. Some don't, and that's okay. But that's, even when you strive to do that, you still are the adult. You still are perceived as having power by the children. You are not, there's not a mutuality between you, even if you don't want it. You have some power. So what that means is you have, what you say carries great weight and has great impact on their view of themselves. So if you disagree with a child, your disagreement is hierarchical. Your point of view carries more weight, whether you like. And Piaget talks about this difficulty in having mutuality with adults and children. It's hard to do, and you really can't ever quite achieve it. But I think what's important about that to understand, which is why we encourage kids to argue among themselves, because they'll take what somebody else says about what they're doing differently than adults. If I tell a child, if I say to a child, what are you making here when you're building something with clay? When I say, what are you making? What am I telling that child? That they're supposed to be making something. They can't just be engaged in this process of exploring the sensory feel of the clay. I'm saying the job here is to make something. If another kid says, what are you making? They'd say, nothing.
Or it's like when toddlers just begin to scribble and to have their very first drawings, and everyone says, what is that?
Yeah.
That was kind of crazy. It's like, it's nothing, it's just shapes and colors.
Mm-hmm. I was in the 4-year-old, where was I? Yes, I've been in many different classrooms. I was in one of the pre-K classrooms. And at the reuse station, most of the kids were constructing like robots or a boat or things, and there was a teacher with the glue gun and making these amazing things out of reuse materials. And one child was sitting there, and I ended up focusing on him, and he was exploring cork, bottle caps, corrugated paper, and that was about it. And everything he did, like he would fold the paper, put it in the bottle cap, and use the cork to push it down. And he did that sort of over and over, and then he'd take it out and do it again. And then he'd rub the bottle cap against the cardboard. And then he'd take the cork and go like this. I had no idea what he was doing, but he clearly was not making anything. And that was okay. He was deeply exploring these materials. I don't know how, really, because I don't have a way to see how he's thinking. I wish I did. It was fascinating. But it was not, if I had gone up to him and said, oh, what are you making? He would have probably left. Oh, I'm just fooling, I'm just exploring these materials. And that's important. And by my not saying that, and by my watching him, and I actually was taking pictures of him, I'm showing respect for whatever it is that he's doing, right? That's power. I am not interrupting him. I am being very powerful in that interaction. And that's what we're trying to learn how to do in the early childhood years, is to create contexts where that's what we're doing. When we're not actively talking and interacting with kids and playing with them, we're watching them really carefully and trying to understand what they're doing and supporting that. And in the process, we're honoring them, right? And this is what Malaguchi says: we need to produce situations in which children learn by themselves, in which children can take advantage of their own knowledge and resources autonomously, and in which we guarantee the intervention of the adult as little as possible. We don't want to teach children something they can learn by themselves. A lot of people have said that. We don't want to give them thoughts that they can come up with by themselves. What we want to do is activate within children the desire and will and great pleasure that comes from being the authors of their own learning, the joy that comes with that. So, what do we do as parents to support theory building? Well, we see it happening all the time. I think just seeing it opens your eyes to all kinds of things that you don't just think, oh, well, this is just something they do in school. I don't have to worry about them constructing and extending that knowledge. It's happening all the time. You'll see it. You do see it. And again, like I've said, the traditional view of this is that children are learning only in certain contexts where it's intended for them to learn, or from certain materials, and that parents need to know things and answer questions. The constructivist view, Children are learning all of the time in both planned and spontaneous ways and contexts, and parents are not, and teachers are not the source of knowledge, but encourage children to answer their own questions. A lot of teachers who take my classes will say, well, I don't know how, I can't change my whole classroom. What can I do to try to move this forward for myself? And I'll say, well, one thing you can do is when a child asks you a question, turn it back to them. Just try that. And a lot of people say when they do that, everything changes. Because then children are exploring and empowered and move forward. And this is an example just where it is. At my school at Portland State, the lab school there, they were in the gym, and some of the children, this was a time for motor activity, but a bunch of the children started focusing on the water fountain and how it worked. And you see, they're very short children. And so this was quite an experience to try to see what was happening in the water fountain. And the teacher noticed that they were doing this and took some pictures of it. And so the fact that it wasn't like, okay, it's time for us to be in the gym moving around. No, these kids were really interested in how the water was moving and how they were directing it with that faucet. So the other thing we do is we pay attention, we notice it, and we try to figure out what's going on. The pedagogy of listening is what they call it in Reggio Emilia. And how do we support it? Well, what the teacher in this classroom did, and this is a situation in education, is he took pictures of it. He put those pictures up. Just documenting. When you see documentation in a classroom, it says something to children about their work, right? About the meaning of the experiences to them. And then they went and explored fountains in Portland, Oregon, where I live. We have lots of them. And so you provide then, you honor what children are doing spontaneously by extending it, by highlighting it, by acknowledging it. If a child shows an interest in an organ and how it works, you go to an organ concert, or you try to think of ways to support that interest, that desire, that passion that children have. And we provide opportunities. One of the things, and this gets to the idea of failure. I keep pointing to you because you said that. Failure. That's terrible.
I have to say, I do believe opportunities are,
yes.
Opportunity, it is an opportunity.
Yes, exactly.
I
but
don't believe in failure.
I know. Okay, on the record, she doesn't believe. But the thing is, when we put forth an idea about something, we make a prediction. That's a scary thing to do. It takes courage. Theory building takes courage because you're putting forth an idea, trying something out that may or may not work. It's risky. You, in a classroom and in home, you need to set up a context where that's not only okay, it's actually, like I said, it's cherished, it's welcome. It's like, wow, isn't that interesting that didn't work that way? Wonder what else we could do. And as adults, the other thing that's important is that we engage in theory building too, and I'm going to talk about that. So how do you communicate this image of the child? You provide time. We've talked about all of this. You provide resources. You support involvement and engagement without intrusion or interruption. You listen in the broadest sense of the word, and you respond to children's statements and questions. How you respond is an interesting question, but I'd like you to think and talk amongst yourselves. We still have a little time? Are we doing okay? Okay. I think if we take a little bit of time just to think about when was a time that you listened deeply to your child. And by that I mean think about if a child says something or asks you a question that seems that you could respond to without listening. And I'll give you an example in the election in the United States that's happening right now.
Hold on to that chair.
I may never go back. My partner, his son asked, who's 19 years old, was asking him, saying some things about the candidate that my partner is very adamantly for, and he was sort of questioning and critical of the candidate. And my partner, who's not as, he's a physicist, so he's not an early childhood person like me. He just said, well, that's stupid. You know, that's wrong. You're wrong. No, that's not true. And I said, wait, stop. Because this is a 19-year-old who is putting forth his questions, his ideas that are different from my partner's. And how do you respond in a way that is supportive of the fact that he's trying to figure this out? This is a very confusing time. He's putting forth his ideas to his father, probably to elicit that kind of reaction. And what's a better way to respond? Instead of saying, well, no, that's not true, you're wrong. You say, well, tell me more about how you're thinking and why you're thinking that. Because when you say, tell me more, that gets at the beginning of a dialogue and a discussion with your child. That shows that you consider your child's ideas worthy of dialogue and discussion. So instead of, let's not do this, let's move on, because I think I'd like time for questions and answers. But this is something to think about. When have you, we all do it, when have you not listened deeply to your child and cut them off or answered their question or told them what to do? We do it all the time. Sometimes, like I said, we have to, or we just can't help ourselves. And that's okay, but just to be more reflective about it. I want to just quickly end with thinking about parents as theory builders. And this is that when we resolve to pay attention and listen and learn from children, we are admitting that we don't know what's going on in their heads. We don't know how to do our job in a way. We are not always certain of what we do as parents. And when I was in Reggio Emilia the first time, as an expert in young children, I was there, right? And the first time, one of the people in Reggio said, what you need to do to work with children is make a declaration of ignorance. Say, you don't know what is going on. And if you do that, you're more open to hearing them and learning from them. And so this idea of learning from and with your children, to see it as an opportunity to try to understand how they're thinking.
Declarations yourself, not to the children though, right? Or
No, make it to yourself. But when you make it, say, I don't know anything. But it is saying that I really don't know, and because I don't know, I can be present, really trying to understand you. I mean, sometimes it is okay to say you don't know to kids. I mean, trying to figure out what's really going on. If you see something on the surface, you think this is just baby doll play. It turned out this was a much more complex thing about many other things besides baby doll play that the teachers open themselves up to seeing. You don't make assumptions. It's like the stereotype example. You don't make assumptions about what's going on for your kids. And you go into your experiences with children and your own children and others just being able to be surprised. So on the surface, you think, well, you're just being stubborn and inappropriate. You think about something your child does. I mean, we all do that. Instead, you say, well, what's really going on here? What are they trying to communicate here? And you don't underestimate their capabilities. They're doing the best they can and deserve that assumption. And you take them seriously and respond to them with respect. So this idea, again, I just want to end with this note. The image of the child as rich in potential, strong, powerful, competent, and most of all, connected to adults and other children. The rich child, Malaguzzi calls this, an active learner. Learning is a cooperative and communicative activity in which, I like this, construct knowledge, make meaning of the world together with adults and other children. So, this is what we have to hold. Even when what they're doing might appear to be not reflecting that for whatever reason, to make this assumption, then try to figure it out. These values, when we think of this, it means a lot of uncertainty, diversity, subjectivity, dialogue, democracy, and experimentation. And so, when we look at something that children are doing here, what's going on here, my answer to the question to these teachers and adults was, I have no idea. And isn't that amazing? So to really embrace that uncertainty and see this as something that makes our parenting role joyful and interesting, and we can have a lot to learn. So this is the motto in Reggio Emilia, is nothing without joy. And so that's the end.